Guest is a two-term congressman, Francis Rooney, who represents Florida's 19th district. He previously served as U.S. ambassador to the Holy See under President George W. Bush from 2005 to 2008. I met him back then at a reception. He did receptions. It was a great thing. Representative Rooney, it's great to see you again. What I was really interested in, I'm so sad you're not going to be around, that you want to leave government and go back into the private practice, but I wanted to have you in this today because I really respect your commentary about tough issues. I mean, you're a believer in data, in science. You've been out there on climate policies. And I guess my question to you is, what do you think we need to do to bring, a next generation, a new generation of expertise about policy, not politics, but policy? Because I know it's an obsession of yours. What would you do?
Well, I think we have to make government service attractive. And this past 4 years has not been a real climate for making government service attractive at all. I understand from when Bill McKinley testified about the impeachment business that 20% of the foreign service officers either left or were fired under Rex Tillerson. That doesn't create a very good atmosphere for finding good policymakers.
Well, if you kind of look at that, and you have been out there on national security questions and how to get it right, and you just talked to how the State Department has been come back. We just had somebody from the telecommunications sector. We're going to have the former Deputy Secretary of Education. You look across government, and it's all gotten really, really thinner. I'm just wondering at some level, make it attractive. But do you see real-time, real-world consequences of having lost that expertise today, particularly with your district, your constituents in Florida?
Well, I think there's certainly consequences in the State Department, but the State Department's kind of hollowed out, and hopefully now with Secretary Blinken, they will be able to rebuild the morale and staff back up. And I understand that that's similar in other parts of the government. I mean, we had some pretty severe hostility to different parts of the government. Some areas were moved out to the Midwest from Washington, D.C., which probably had a negative morale impact on people who've raised their families there. And then this business about converting career bureaucrats, if you will, into political appointees, I think is a very dangerous precedent and opens the door to politicizing the bureaucracy. And one of the most important things that we have in this country is a nonpartisan, dedicated career government service in all areas of the government.
Look, Congressman, I totally agree with you, and I can say that because I'm on the opinion side of our shop, so I can have my own views. But one of the things, and I'm probably overstating this, and I just want to tell everybody this is overstating for effect, but you remember the Soviet Union, you remember how communist societies, there would be a political commissar, and that those people who knew something, on nuclear arms control or how to grow crops or, how to manage, people in different ways, because there were good people in these countries as well, but they would be pushed aside, pushed down, or forced through a political filter. And I don't want to say that we're the Soviet Union here, but the rise of a kind of political filter is something we've seen happen. Do you think that your colleagues and on either side of that, because I think it can happen on the left as well, but do you think there's an understanding among legislators that there's a danger of that?
I'm not so sure how broadly it might be understood, because there's, increased in the recent years a hostility towards the government. And a lot of candidates, especially many Republicans, have run on hostility towards the government as part of their campaign. And so that doesn't exactly breed a lot of confidence or reflect understanding that we need the technical expertise that you're talking about.
You are one of the few Republicans that have been very, very active out on climate change issues, the Paris Accord. You've been worried about not only dealing with how we get this right, but also dealing with remediation now, because we've already achieved so much. And I'm just wondering, I'd love to get your insights into those areas of policy expertise and what warning lights you have, or what areas of concern as you leave government. I want to continue to keep bringing you back for discussions, when you go back into the private sector, because I think you have an interesting take, sort of a dashboard that I think is important on climate. And sometimes I think it's important to kind of look at the way somebody across the aisle pragmatically looks at these questions.
Well, I think there's a broadening appreciation for the risks of climate change and increased CO2 in the atmosphere. Certainly, you're seeing all the major oil companies take public steps to reflect their concern about it and the need to transition to less carbon-centric forms of transportation. That's a good thing. I think you're even seeing some Republicans now talk about planting trees as carbon sinks. Hopefully, President Biden will be a lot tougher on Brazil and incentivize President Bolsonaro to stop chopping down the Amazon, which is the largest carbon sink in the world.
You know, I just before this moderated a forum with a commissioner from the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation, various financiers from Goldman Sachs, PNB Paribas, others, on looking at the kind of large investment world and finance and, you know, pricing in violent weather and what it does to crops, et cetera. It's a very interesting and sophisticated discussion that flew, you know, somewhat over my head. But what I had in this conversation was, you know, arena of people that were real policy experts. And I would say maybe two of them had been in government now and the rest had been previously in government. And it just was going on knowing I was going to be talking to you. When you talk about government service looking attractive, being attractive to these people to come in, so that sort of expertise in a very new and important area of the climate equation, I'm just interested in what pieces do you think we need to put in place? Same thing for the State Department, which I know you've been writing about. What kinds of things might lure expertise in other than having, you know, a nice boss?
Well, in the environmental area, I think it's important that we let the scientists do the job that they've historically been hired to do. I think some recent appointees in the EPA and the Interior Department kind of went against that grain. And there's a lot of science behind what's happening. Certainly the ocean heat content, the amount of acid in the water, temperature of the water, those are all things that are empirically verifiable and therefore can lead to making decisions of how to deal with it.
We have some questions from the audience we've been getting in, Congressman. We have one from Shane Strasberg, who's a digital service expert at the U.S. Digital Service. And Shane asks, before bringing back interest in government jobs, how might we repair trust in government to provide services, aid, and safety net for a population ravaged by COVID? So on the COVID front, are you hopeful that your colleagues and folks are going to come together to begin, solving that breach, if you will, as many people see it, or solving this time of need? Or are you satisfied with where things are now?
No, I'm very hopeful that they will be able to come to agreement. I read this morning in the paper that it looked like they were, but I just heard something from the Minority Whip's office that maybe they haven't, and there's no vote scheduled for tomorrow. So I don't know. They've got to do something. As the questioner mentioned, there's people that are under severe duress all around the country as a result of this, and I think it's incumbent on the government to try to help them out.
Let me ask you the personal question, because I know you're going to go back into, as I understand from your team, that you're going to go back into your own company and private sector and kind of work on that front. I'm interested in what happens, because I'm somebody who believes you need two healthy political parties in the country. You need to have, folks understanding they're on the same boat. They may want to turn it different directions, but they're on the same boat. Otherwise, it sinks. Are you going to be involved with try to, after Donald Trump leaves office, try to kind of give a new and different dimension to where the Republican Party goes?
I would like to. I've been working very closely intently with the leadership for the past 4 years, urging them to broaden our base by re-engaging in the discussions about climate and about guns, quite frankly. The younger people poll so solidly that they're very concerned about the environment and want to see the government take responsible actions, as well as take actions about, background checks and things like that. And it wasn't always this way with the Republican Party. Nixon started the EPA. Both of the Bushes expanded the Clean Air Act. George Bush tried to make the assault weapon ban permanent.
Those are extraordinary comments. What else should we be doing on that front?
Well, I think that if more and more people would urge the Republican leadership and seek candidates, quite frankly, who realize that we need to broaden our base or we're not going to win anything, we might be able to develop more understanding and more people willing to vote on measures that would deal with the environment and guns.
You were down in Florida, which is one. I'm just going to wrap up here because I'm, kind of looking at this combination. People make mistakes. They make mistakes, and you got to, course correct and go in a different direction. And same thing in foreign policy, domestic policy. We've been talking a lot about COVID and its management, but I think a lot of people have been wondering, when you see scientists and doctors reviled in the press, you see mask wearing, become a controversial political act. And that's just in the bluster of it. That's before you get kind of deeper. I've spent a lot of time on these shows talking to Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami, whom I have a lot of time for, who's been trying to work, and proactively on how do you get the health habits in place to do this. I think the governor of Florida may see things a bit differently. I'm just interested in your insights as you're leaving Congress. Are there bank shots out there in terms of depoliticizing some of these important public health and public need causes? Are we just in an era where everything is going to become toxic, divided, and really just paralyzed?
Well, there's a lot of partisanship for sure. I wrote an article here a while back saying that if three things we could do to departisan the situation would be to have term limits, to bring back the fairness doctrine so that broadcast media has to publish both sides of a political statement, and to somehow figure out how to have less highly partisan congressional districts. Those would help. I'm also hopeful that President Biden, as far as the science of COVID and mask wearing and distancing and things like that, will set a leadership example that people will be willing to follow.
You remind me of my old friend Amo Houghton. I don't know if many people knew Amo Houghton. He was representative from New York, and he helped set up something called the Republican Main Street Partnership. These were just common sense, pragmatic, thinking on how to do things. John McCain was, on the Senate side involved in that group, and just basically looking at the fairness doctrine. How do you decrease, big money that may, zip us in different ways. I want to thank you very much for your candor, Representative Rooney, for joining us. I want to wish you well in your next steps after you leave Congress, which I'm not thrilled by because I like your views. I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I hope everyone has a great holiday.
Thank you.